cartoons from present and the past. Every week will be an animated bash. What a cartoon! What a cartoon! Maybe a short but mostly shows. We'll talk, we'll analyze, exploring as we go. What a cartoon! What a cartoon! What a cartoon! What a cartoon!
Hello everybody, welcome to What a Cartoon, where we bring our parrots on stealth missions. I'm your host, Slime Nightmare Haver Bob Mackey, and this is an audio exploration of every cartoon ever who is here with me today.
Son of a bilge rat, it's Henry Gilbert.
That almost got PG TVY7 for a second there. And our special guest is...
Jeremy Crimson Twins Perish. I finish my own sentences.
Oh boy, he just bilocated everybody. You missed it. And today's episode is the G.I. Joe episode, There's No Place Like Springfield, parts 1 and 2.
G.I. Joe is the code name for America's daring, highly trained special mission force. Its purpose, to defend human freedom against Cobra, a ruthless terrorist organization determined to rule the world.
I'd like a non-biased explanation of G.I. Joe. I don't know what that guy's agenda is.
You're on G.I. Joe's
His
propaganda.
agenda is to sell you toys.
Oh boy,
Buy some toys.
It's working. So these episodes aired on December 12th and 13th, 1985, and I believe this was Jeremy's doing. As a G.I. Joe fan from the past, I remember reading your website back in high school, Jeremy, and whenever you wrote about G.I. Joe, I was like, write about Nintendo. What is this? I don't care about G.I. Joe.
Sorry.
But I watched these episodes. I thought they were a lot of fun, and you brought a lot of G.I. Joe history to us because you are a huge fan of the oldie-timey G.I. Joes.
Yeah.
Well, I guess this is kind of the next generation of G.I. Joe.
Sort of. I mean, I have mixed feelings about G.I. Joe now, given what the American military stands for and just kind of our history and everything. But, as something that I enjoyed as a kid, sure. And I come from a place where I grew up in very conservative West Texas, but my parents brought me there from Flint, Michigan. So there was like this whole liberal conservative thing happening. I grew up going to church, but what I took away from church was like, be good to people, give things to people, be kind and generous and charity, not, hate gay people. So yeah, G.I. Joe is yeah, right? But a lot of people didn't get that lesson that I grew up with.
Do unto Cobra as he would do unto you.
Pretty much.
No, wait, don't do that.
No. Yeah, G.I. Joe is a TV series. What we're talking about now is a TV series that ran in the early 80s, mid 80s, as a tie-in to a toy line that was itself kind of a reboot of an older concept and, kind of jumped in to take advantage of Star Wars mania and also Ronald Reagan's Morning in America, Breakfast in America of Supertramp. At the same time, the people writing G.I. Joe, both the comic that was kind of like the foundation of it and the cartoon that was sort of a spin-off of the comic, there was a lot of liberal sensibilities there. And the foundation for the G.I. Joe fiction was actually created by Larry Hama. So I think the best place to start talking about G.I. Joe is at the beginning, which is in 1964 when the toy company Hasbro launched the G.I. Joe toy line. And this was basically Hasbro saying, wow, that Barbie thing is really popular, that had launched like 5 years before. We want to get in on that, but we should do it for boys because toys need to be very, very specific to gender, and we have to enforce roles for our baby boomers in a very strict way. So G.I. Joe was basically Barbie, but cooler. G.I. Joe, it was the same scale as Barbie. He had soft, good clothes.
About those accessories you sell to dress up.
Oh, yeah,
G.I. Joe
absolutely.
as well.
Just
uniforms, though.
Johnny
and
Long
guns.
Torso.
Right. But, it was just kind of based in a sort of general military milieu. G.I. Joe is just a kind of slang expression for an American soldier.
Yeah. And I think all of the toys for boys, boomer boys, were just like very sharp metal fire trucks.
Yeah, it was like guns and radio flyers and David Bowie hats and David Bowie knives.
David Bowie hats?
Or
Davy Crockett
Davy
hat.
Crockett.
Daniel Boone?
Davy, yeah.
Okay.
Bowie knives and Crockett hats.
Boy, David Bowie hats would be awesome.
But that's way too ahead of
yeah.
time.
Only David Bowie had a David Bowie hat when he was a young boomer lad.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of experience with the 12-inch G.I. Joe figures, but my uncle did have the astronaut and Mercury capsule, which was to scale, and it was really amazing, and he was like, don't you touch this. But he let me look at it once, and it was cool.
In my heavily gendered world of 80s toys, if I saw any action figure that was that tall, I still thought like, no, this is Barbie size. This must be for girls to be at this size. Like, so even if I saw I had like a Spider-Man that was that size, and though I also wouldn't get it just because like it can't play with my other guys. It's too tall. The scale is all off.
He's a giant. He'd be overpowered in all of my fights.
Yeah, well, that wasn't so much so much of a marketing thing as it was just a reality of the 70s that emerged from the OPEC crisis and the rising cost of gasoline. So, yeah, basically G.I. Joe was really big in the 60s and then started to dwindle in the early 70s because Vietnam came along. And once upon a time, America being engaged in a protracted, pointless military excursion in a much less powerful nation was conceived by the American people as bad. And people did not like the idea of the military or Vietnam.
What, those weirdos?
Yeah, it
Sounds
was a different time.
Yeah.
So that was a ding against G.I. Joe. So Hasbro retooled it as the adventure team going out into the woods and like trying to find Bigfoot or something. And that had, I think, less of a hook than the original concept. But the real kicker for G.I. Joe, the original line, was the oil crisis, and petroleum is used to make plastics. And so all of a sudden these 12-inch figures were very expensive, so Hasbro just kind of stopped, and G.I. Joe went away. But then, you fast forward to 1977, and Kenner was like, there's this weird TV series or movie coming out called Star Wars. We should jump on that, take a risk, make some action figures, and they became fabulously wealthy because it was a much bigger hit than anyone expected. They introduced Star Wars figures at the 3 3/4 inch scale, which is like 1/12th. I don't know. They're very small.
Wise, I don't know.
Yeah, they're very tiny.
But they're perfect for your hands. You can have two figures in your hands fighting each other, just bouncing off each other.
And they're big enough that you can still have some articulation, like head, arms, legs. And you can make vehicles that are hefty that the characters can sit in and still, not be like super humongous. So this was a huge hit, and I think Hasbro looked at this and said, wait a minute, we could get in on this. We could jump in on this line. We have this property lying fallow. And at the same time, in Japan, a company called Takara was developing a series called Microman, which used the same scale as Kenner. And I don't know if Kenner took their idea or if they took Kenner's idea. In any case, these Microman figures were about the same size as Star Wars figures, but they were way more detailed and articulated. They could bend their arms at the elbows and their legs at the knee, and they could twist at the waist and, do all this other stuff. So Hasbro actually had a good relationship with Takara. And I don't know the full details there, but if you look, the early Transformers are actually taken from Takara toy lines, which are derived from the Microman franchise. So Diaclone and what else was there? Micro Change.
Yeah, no, I learned that from I watched the Toys That Made Us documentary on both Transformers and G.I. Joe, and what shocked me finding out with Transformers from that was that there was no one line. They just like, if you, Takara, have a toy that transforms, we'll just take it and we'll call it that, and then they'll just make their own. That's why there were like 18 different types of Transformers, and they made no real sense.
Right, that's why Bumblebee looked like a Chorokyu penny racer, and then you had like Optimus Prime, who was an actual robot, and then you had characters like Ironhide and Ratchet that kind of turned into robots, but they didn't have faces. It was like, where's their face? Well, it's because they weren't robots; they were mech suits that someone was supposed to sit in the little seat. So it was this kind of crazy mess of things. Hasbro eventually licensed that as Transformers, but initially what they were interested in was the Microman scale and like the figure bucks for that, and so they took that and they adapted it into a new version of G.I. Joe. The idea there was really not so much to sell the figures themselves, which were the point of the 12-inch line, but actually the vehicles that they could sit in. And so they came out with this line of like, there was a tank, there was a Jeep, there were like gun emplacements, there was a base, there was all this stuff, and they had the little figures that were designed to fit in these vehicles, and there were little pegs on the running boards for the Jeep, so you could put your figures on the outside of the vehicles, which was very, very bad combat tactics, but looked really cool when you're a kid and you had like a Jeep going into combat with like 6 figures on it, all, holding a gun out. It was, just meant to be kind of like fun. There was a high level of playability. All the figures had lots of accessories, from helmets to backpacks that would plug into the back to little guns that they could carry or knives. They didn't have, soft goods clothes at that scale, but instead what they had was accessories, and they sold accessory packs that you could, outfit your military group with different weapons or, the little laser rifles that you see in the cartoon.
All the swords. I love the sword. My favorite G.I. Joes were the ones that came with swords. I also had some guy who had a flamethrower, which I thought was pretty cool too.
That was probably Barbecue.
Yeah,
or it could have been a Dreadnought. It could have been Torch, the Dreadnought.
No, I think it was a Joe. So
okay,
I'm gonna go with Barbecue.
But that was the thing about this line of GI Joes was that instead of just being GI Joe, the all-American action hero guy who is a soldier, these characters all had names. They all had little bio cards on the back of their package that had a very brief description of like their background, and it gave them a real name and a fake social security number, and it told you what their primary specialty was and their secondary specialty. And sometimes, their specialty was like espionage or artillery, and sometimes they'd have like really weird, unexpected secondary specialties like financing and accounting or chef. And so, from these details, you started to get these characters developed. And
that's such a smart way to sell a toy. Like if you're a kid seeing this on the toy shelf, this makes it stand out. If you're especially a nerd like I was as a kid who got into the continuity of everything, I was like, oh, well, this isn't just any old figure. This is the life. They've lived an entire existence.
It gives you lore with the toy. And Jeremy, I remember on your old website, if you're willing to tell the audience this, you would make those little dossiers for.
Oh yeah, that was a long time ago.
For which characters did you actually like? Were they characters you created? Like,
oh yeah,
I forgot
were like
what the
my
joke
site
was.
mascots.
Oh, okay,
Toasty Frog.
Yeah. I wasn't sure if you did that
Soldier,
with
Sailor Rowena,
like cereal mascots or something. Maybe I'm conflating two different ideas.
That was a different thing. It was just like the site mascots.
Got it.
And that was like 20 years ago.
I do remember seeing those. Yeah.
So the thing is, Hasbro realized that Star Wars figures were popular not because the figures were amazing; they were okay, but they were tied into Star Wars, and so kids wanted to have their Luke Skywalker action figure. They wanted a Darth Vader. Like, those characters might not have meant anything just as toys, but with a, multi-million-dollar franchise that was popular the world over to tie into, all of a sudden those figures became very desirable. So they were like, we have to create our own fiction. So they teamed up with Marvel Comics, who did a lot of licensing back then. They were in kind of like a weird state. They weren't super big. Like, Marvel in the late 70s was not Marvel of 2018, that's for sure.
No, and we talked about this a little on the Spider-Man episode we did, which is that, like, in the early 80s, Marvel set up Marvel Productions first to animate Spider-Man cartoons, like the Spider-Man series and Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, but that wasn't the only thing they produced.
Right, and this was kind of that same initiative. And Marvel had, they had seen a lot of success in fact, the studio was basically saved by the fact that, like Kenner, they said, sure, we'll take a shot on this weird Star Wars thing. We'll make comics on that. And those first 4 comics were, based on the movie, and they were a huge success, and they immediately said, we got to keep doing this. And that saved Marvel from going bankrupt in the 70s. So they were all about, jumping into these other multimedia properties and developing them. And G.I. Joe was one of the first ones they did, and probably, I would argue, it was the most successful of them. And I think that has a lot to do with the talent involved. No one really wanted to work on the G.I. Joe property. Everyone was like, this isn't, Spider-Man, this isn't X-Men, I don't care about this.
Well, yeah,
so it kind of bounced around internally and then landed on the desk of Larry Hama, who was kind of like an indie comic creator who ended up at Marvel. He had also worked at DC and had done a bunch of sort of like underground black and white comics in the 70s. He had been an actor. He was in MASH. There's a few episodes of MASH. Before that, he had served in Vietnam. So he had like military experience, and this landed on his desk, and he made it great.
Well, if you were an Asian actor in LA in the 70s, you were likely at least on one episode of MASH.
Yeah.
I don't think they had a lot to choose from. But
so what you're saying is basically Star Wars is responsible for the era of TV programs where the toys came first.
Oh, yeah.
Because I remember with Ninja Turtles, I mean, we could talk about He-Man and Thundercats and Transformers and everything like that. With Ninja Turtles, it was like, by that point, it's like, okay, we don't know what the show will be, but make the video game, we'll make the cartoon, someone make action figures, because they were just like, it was like a one launch of everything at once for Ninja
This
Turtles.
Christmas, it's just an all-out assault on children's wallets.
If you have some sort of turtle-based entertainment you crave, it will be available for you.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, this was a little different because this was much more focused. Like, it was Hasbro working in close collaboration with Marvel. And Larry Hama didn't work on this single-handedly. Jim Shooter, the EIC of Marvel, was heavily involved. But
That
Hama's
guy's somebody.
yeah, he's a character. He's his own Cobra Commander. But Hama really, his sensibility drove the G.I. Joe property. And in fact, Hama had been pitching a S.H.I.E.L.D. comic spinoff that would have starred Nick Fury Jr. And like that pitch never went anywhere at Marvel. They were like, we're not interested. So what he ended up doing was, when G.I. Joe came across his desk, he was like, well, I'm going to take, I think it was going to be called Fury Force. I'm going to take Fury Force and I'm going to just retool it into G.I. Joe. And that's also where you get Cobra, the villains. They're basically Hydra.
They're
Cobra,
just as
Hydra.
ineffectual. Yeah, Cobra, Hydra,
And
Hail Hydra, Hail Cobra. It all fits.
Yeah, I mean, the nature of the comic kind of evolved over the first year of it, but in the very first episode or first issue of the comic, Cobra is just like this terrorist organization on an island in the middle of the Pacific, and they have like this huge base with like all these serpent motifs on it, and it's very silly and very supervillainish. But, you know, as Hama worked on this series more, he started to bring in more of his actual military experience, terminology, his experience of having been in the military and basically not having a lot of respect for politicians and the people calling the shots, like the camaraderie between soldiers and that sort of thing. And that sort of started to define this. But at the same time, it was based on a toy line. So there was this kind of push and pull of like authenticity. And Hama's a really literate guy. Like, reading G.I. Joe comics as a kid taught me a lot about literature. Like, I remember there's one issue where Cobra Commander is complaining about the mercenary named Major Blood, who thinks he's a poet. And Cobra Commander's line is something like, "Blood, that idiot thinks Proust rhymes with Faust." And, you know, I was like,
Jesus.
"Hey, Mom, Dad, who's Proust?" And they were like, no, Proust. He's like, so like, I actually learned a lot from the G.I. Joe comic that is, you know, valuable in life.
I like when creators can slip that stuff in there. And I read a million comics that you could see an unhappy person who's given. So I was going to say that earlier, that with the Marvel bullpen, if you're on staff at Marvel as an editor or writer, you got there to finally tell your Spider-Man story or your Iron Man story, your Captain America story. You're handed a license thing. You know it has low expectations. It's bullshit, and nobody's even going to respect it, probably. So,
right. Well,
yeah,
the thing is, this was a licensed property, but Hama was the one who developed the story for it and the fiction for it, and he developed the characters. All the character bio cards, he wrote those, and they became more and more elaborate as the series went along.
He's grossly underpaid for that too. It's like
Probably.
he wrote the whole story Bible. For
I mean,
things.
I don't know if he got royalties on this, because for a while the G.I. Joe comic was the best-selling comic in America.
Wow,
It's crazy to think, but yeah, like 1985, 86 or so was like it was huge. They did a spin-off comic that was just like much more focused on actual military, you know, missions and standalone stories and that sort of thing. Anyway, I don't want to get too far into the weeds with this, but yeah, Hama really developed this story, and over time the characters developed, and there were these relationships and interconnections, and it got kind of arcane, and eventually it just became all ninjas, because Hama was like way ahead on the whole ninja craze of the 90s. Like, he was doing that in the 80s. So it kind of lost its way, but for like the first, I don't know, like issues 10 through 60 or so are really just like, it's this constantly evolving storyline. And even though it's about toys, it rarely, like, you know, there'll be like all of a sudden a bunch of new recruits show up and you're like, oh, okay. But for the most part, it makes really good use of all these characters, and sometimes characters die. It's very rarely the toys that you could buy, but he would introduce a lot of extra characters who would become important to the fiction, and they would play a big part in the story. And then at some point, they would probably die because he had the freedom to do that with his own characters, and it raised the stakes.
Yeah, but that's what supporting characters are for in most comic books too. Like, you can't really kill Spider-Man, but you can make him really care about somebody around him and kill them. But
it's sort of like the 80s sitcom thing where a character that's new will die in that episode just to have someone go through mourning. Like Alex Keaton's best friend, who we never saw before.
Right. I've been talking a lot about the comic, which isn't really that relevant. I mean, it is, but it isn't, because, the comic and the characters were all developed in tandem, but the cartoon was developed somewhat independently. Like, they used Hama's work as kind of a baseline and then went off in their own direction. Like I said, the comic, Cobra goes from being like supervillains to kind of interesting over the course of the first year or so. But the cartoon never really went beyond just like, the serpent head motifs for their giant machines and wacky schemes that never pan out, because it's a cartoon, it's for kids. And
they're a loser squad.
Yeah, I mean, television broadcast standards were a lot. They were pretty strict for kids, and I guess they still are. But they couldn't have deaths on screen. They couldn't even have implications of death. So whenever someone is shot down in an airplane, you see them parachute to safety. People don't shoot ballistic weapons; they shoot lasers.
God, the laser sound is so. I love that laser sound so much.
Although, I mean, it's not shown in this episode, but I remember we just did the Spider-Man episode in which there's a flashback, and it's explained that a man with a gun showed up, and Uncle Ben was there, and then they don't say anything else. Like, you fill in the details. But in this one, there's a part that kind of shocked me for this being as old as it is, where it's like, Lady J is dead. She's dead.
Yeah,
she died.
They deal with the fact that people can die. It's just you never see them die. And they don't show her dying, and they don't explain how she died. It's just like, well, this was a consequence of the war.
I just thought it was refreshing to hear the word dead.
Yeah,
and Spider-Man's just like,
that was not that
you
common.
figure it out. Yeah.
It was pretty atypical even for this cartoon. But, occasionally they did get into some of the more ambitious storylines. And actually this one, There's No Place Like Springfield, parts 1 and 2, comes in at the very end of the first season of the show. And remember, this was syndicated cartoon season, so that's 55 episodes instead of 26 episodes.
And they start airing in September, and then by the time the end of the year is they're all out of episodes.
They're just burning them daily.
But that's what Disney did. That's what everybody did. And,
well, the goal is to hit 100.
Yeah.
So 2 seasons, that's 100 episodes. You get a syndication package, and that's money forever.
I assume that the 50 episodes were a syndication package.
Yeah, like the goal I know is always 100 episodes, but I guess this was syndicated from the start.
For first run syndication, I think it's a little lower.
Like 55, 65, something like that. But yeah, the first 2 series were miniseries, and they were animated by Toei, who you might have seen stuff like Dragon Ball, Sailor Moon, One Piece. They were like huge in Japan, but I believe Sunbow did the first syndicated season, which is why it looks
first
a lot
and second,
worse. Okay, yeah.
Well, we need to explain what Sunbow is. And Sunbow is literally an animation a studio created for the sake of marketing. Jay Bacall and someone else, it was an ad firm that Hasbro worked with, and they basically said, we want to do this multimedia property for the launch for this toy line. So, the marketing agency put together an animation studio in conjunction with Marvel. So this is a Marvel Sunbow cartoon created by an animation studio that existed specifically to sell toys. And they also did Transformers and a few other things.
So they don't
My
care
Little
too
Pony.
much about artistic merit.
No, but because this was created in conjunction with Marvel, you get actual like heavy hitters, like genuinely creative people, big names in comics. These 2 episodes in particular were written by Steve Gerber. That is Howard the Duck, Destroyer Duck, Steve Gerber.
That's what really interested me about doing this one over. It's also one of the few I really remember, other than the movie of the original series. But Steve Gerber is like a personal hero of mine. I love Steve Gerber. He passed away not too long ago, and he created Howard the Duck, thought he owned Howard the Duck, found out from Marvel, you do not own Howard the Duck. We own him, and you're fired. But he was like this interesting counterculture dude working within Marvel and giving it like this kind of hippie, psychedelic kind of sensibility, and he'd only get weirder into the 80s and 90s. And one of that Destroyer Duck thing you mentioned, one of the funniest things he ever did when he was writing for Marvel, one of his last times, he did a storyline where Howard the Duck goes into a factory in a team-up comic, I believe, with the Hulk. And then meanwhile, he's writing Savage Dragon comic where Savage Dragon goes into the same looking factory. And they say in that somehow Howard the Duck got replaced with a clone. So the one you're reading in the Marvel universe is the clone Howard, and the real Howard is Destroyer Duck now in his
Howard
comics.
the Duck had a clone saga.
Yes.
Wow.
Okay.
I wanted to
that
point
was his way around the copyright.
I want to talk about the animation really quick because, like a lot of cartoons from this era, it is basically anime down to the art direction, the cutting, the acting. And watching this, I was like, this looks like totally low budget anime from this era. It looks like Fist of the North Star in terms of how characters move, how they're sort of sketchy looking.
Yeah, or like Gundam,
Yeah.
or all the television contemporaries in anime in the early 80s.
And frankly,
definitely get the feel.
It kind of looks more 70s anime at times, too.
Yeah.
I mean, this is definitely farmed out
for
outside
sure.
the country.
Yeah.
So I think, some of these episodes, there's a lot of different studios working on them. So character models vary from scene to scene.
Yeah, lip sync as well.
Yeah.
Like there's like 5 lip sync failures in this one.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and all kinds of details. Like in the second episode, there's the nurse who gets knocked unconscious with the poisoned milk, and like sometimes she's dark haired, and sometimes you see her and she's blonde. It's just I think also that Crimson Guard, the lady who's interrogating Shipwreck. Like at one point she has sunglasses, and then she doesn't, and then she does, and then she doesn't. So
There were no such things as retakes in 1985.
I think something that helps our memories of the quality of the animation of the show when you're not watching it regularly is that you saw the movie like with either Transformers or G.I. Joe. They both had movies that had very good animation, Transformers especially. And so you remember that. And then if you go back and watch regular episodes, you're like, oh, this is what it was day to day.
Well, as someone who was watching these cartoons as they were first airing, I didn't have, the movie that would come out in the future to reference. But what I did have was stuff like Hanna-Barbera and Filmation, and they were crap. Like their animation was really bad.
This looks better than He-Man.
Yeah, by far.
Yeah.
And like Filmation stuff, I mean, no offense to the people who worked hard on these things, I'm sure, but they were done as cheaply as possible.
Those losers animated them in America. That's why they were bad.
Yeah, so they were done as cheaply as possible, taking as many shortcuts as they had to fit the budget. And this just didn't have quite those same constraints. So even though it is, pretty flimsy animation, by the standards of what was airing on television at the time, there weren't a lot of shows that were better. Like maybe Gummy Bears, which I think came on kind of toward the end of this, and that was
That
Disney. So
was when Disney wanted to improve the low standards of Saturday morning cartoons at the time.
Yeah, it's definitely ambitious for this era. If you look at its contemporaries, they would never animate armies attacking each other.
Right, and you get a lot of like full body animation. So even though it's kind of like, ooh, the modeling's not so great, at least characters are actually moving around. You don't get a lot of like where there's a static scene and there's someone's mouth moving. That just doesn't happen here.
Yeah, and also I give it another credit for like tonally, it's more grown up and complete than say it's not a goofy animal cartoon. It's not even like He-Man where they're like we got to have a silly cartoon character like Orko hang around.
Well, there is the parrot who is sort of like Slimer of this world. Which I like the parrot.
Yeah, well, okay, so the parrot is Polly. And he is, or she.
I don't need to know about his relationship status, Jeremy.
Well, no. He's Polly is a package deal with Shipwreck, who it turns out is a character who was created for the cartoon and ascended into action figure status, which I guess is why you never see him in the comic book, because Larry Hama was like, I didn't make this guy, I don't care.
I don't care about the Navy.
But yeah, like there were characters created for the comic that made it into the toy line, and characters created for the cartoon that made it into the toy line, and Shipwreck was one of those. And this episode features around Shipwreck. Definitely, he does kind of stand at odds with a lot of the other action figures of the time. He's just like a sailor in the white Donald Duck cap, basically. Or not the Donald Duck cap, but the white. What the hell are those called? He's got dungarees and just like a blue duty shirt.
Yeah, which is weird though because he isn't in this entire two-parter because he's either in his stealth suit or in his regular clothes. Yeah,
right. But he was created for the cartoon and was an instant hit with kids, I think, because the actor Neil Ross, the voice actor, was like, well, I'm going to do Jack Nicholson for this character.
Wait till they get a load of me.
Yeah, exactly. I don't know why, but he was a breakout star, and he was kind of like one of the stars of the show.
Well, I get why the weirdos break out so much on this show because like Flint and Duke are both such like boring jerks. They're just like
Duke is the worst.
Yeah, they both just suck. Well, they're not even that interesting. They're like Cyclops without any powers, even.
Right.
So, meanwhile, when you've got a never talking dude in all black with a sword, or you have a guy who speaks in rhymes, or you have a weird dude with a parrot, like that's interesting. You latch onto those guys.
I mean, his voice is ridiculous, but I enjoy enjoyed it because no matter what is happening, he's always just a little bit pissed off.
Yeah,
Even when he's in mourning,
he's
I
like,
can't believe she's dead.
Yeah, he's always like a little sardonic, even when he's happy.
And he really hates his pet.
He
I gotta
does.
say.
He and Polly do not have a good friendship.
And Polly is an Amazon
And
parrot, by the way.
I think Polly has some blackmail on him because to prove later in the show, when Polly destroys his fake duplicate, Shipwreck's like, "How do I know you're real?" And Polly's like, "Well, remember that night in Annapolis?"
Oh boy, there are some skeletons in the closet,
Yes,
possibly
indeed.
real ones. Who knows?
Indeed. So that's kind of the baseline for this episode. Now, one of the interesting things about this episode is that it's a sort of rare example of continuity within the G.I. Joe cartoon, because to really understand this episode, you need to have seen several previous episodes. For one thing, okay, this entire episode is kind of a riff on the TV show The Prisoner, where they're trying to get information from Shipwreck's mind. And so they fool him into thinking like he's had amnesia for the past 5 years, but now he's married and has a kid. So the woman they present as his wife is an original cartoon character from previously in the season, who was like a Cobra agent who was basically turned into a science mermaid.
Yes.
She could breathe underwater and her skin turned blue, and Shipwreck fell in love with her. And then they had to, tragically say farewell at the end. But now he wakes up after 5 years of amnesia, and wow, he's married to Mara, the mermaid woman. She's healed, and they have a baby. They have a
He just
kid.
says a one-off line like, "Oh, that was one of the last things Cobra did, which was cure me anyway."
Yeah, right. And also the big plot resolution. I know we're going out of order and not building up here, but the synthoids, plasma people that melt and everything, that's also from a previous two-parter, like in the middle of the season, where Cobra had this plot to replace like congressmen and the G.I. Joe leadership with basically homunculi.
Yeah. I remember that one
Yeah.
now.
So there's a lot of continuity for like standalone episodes of a TV series.
This is like series finale or season finale type stuff.
It really, I mean, it is. It is. It's like it's all coming together, and yeah. And so this one is one of the episodes of G.I. Joe that's not so much about the big plot, and there is a big plot, but it's really more about the individual characters. And I think that was also one of the strengths of this show, is that you had such a huge cast of characters that occasionally people could tell. The writers could say like, why don't we focus just on this one guy this time, or this one woman's relationship with her family or something like that.
This actually reminded me a lot of the Batman, the animated series episode, Perchance to Dream. It's one with the Mad Hatter in which Batman is hypnotized by the Mad Hatter to think that he is now living his perfect life. His parents are still alive, like his life is very peaceful, it's everything he wants, but it turns out that he is being hypnotized into thinking that. So he's in this alternate world he needs to break out of in order to fix the problem. It's such a great episode.
I remember that when he discovers he's in a dream because he tries to read something.
Yeah.
He's like, I can't read in a dream. That's because this part of your brain reads isn't the dream part.
I mean, you think he would see words before that, but it's a contrivance I'll buy because it's such a good episode.
Well, yeah, and then so the series kind of, G.I. Joe just kind of died out not died out, but like it got less popular as the kids got older, and into the 90s, G.I. Joe was not as big as it used to be.
Well, I think what happened was Hasbro got cheap. So Marvel Sunbow did 2 seasons of this and then the movie. And they got cold feet with the movie because the Transformers movie came out first and was a huge box office bomb. So they were like, ooh, we better release the G.I. Joe movie straight to video. And then instead of renewing their contract with Marvel Sunbow, they were like, well, how about you guys over there at Deke? Can you do this TV series for a lot less money? And Deke said,
but of course.
yeah, exactly. So everything got really bad in seasons like 3 and 4. I don't know how much longer it lasted, but I watched the first 2 seasons and saw just a little bit of the reboot under Deke and said, you know what?
Yeah.
I'm too old for this now.
I mean,
Goodbye.
I made you watch Deke cartoons for this show, like the Super Mario Brothers Super Show and Captain N, and we all knew what Deke was doing in that time period. It was all bad news.
Yeah, even when it was Inspector Gadget, their A show, it still was cheap as shit. Like, if you're some executive, you're just like, well, who cares how good it is? This is just like shit we shovel on children to buy toys. But kids can tell when it's a less good cartoon. They are less interested in buying toys when the cartoon isn't as good, which I wish they'd take more into account, at least from a quality standpoint. But at least Marvel writers like Steve Gerber got paid. You
Right.
know? Oh, and another thing I remember they changed for it was for the movie, they killed Duke in the movie, but at the end, right before the end, they had a voiceover saying like, "And Duke's out of his coma, guys."
Yep.
He's okay, folks. It's all part of the show.
We didn't do an Optimus Prime to him. Please keep buying our toys.
What an odd choice for kids' action figure movies at that time. Like introduce mortality into the mix.
Well, the idea was to clear the deck for the next wave of toys.
Wave 6 is here.
And that idiot character Falcon was supposed to be like the new leader for G.I. Joe, but then they realized, oh wait, the kids have actually grown attached to these characters. Maybe we shouldn't just kill them off.
And that's also when Sergeant Slaughter officially became a G.I. Joe at that point.
Actually, Sergeant Slaughter was in the episode that appears between seasons 1 and 2.
Oh.
Arise, Serpentor, Arise. And he's there to
Whip the G.I. Joes into shape.
And he was able to leave Toontown to be a wrestler occasionally,
Yep.
right? I don't know how that worked.
Yeah, it made sense.
Yeah, these two episodes are interesting because they actually work as a self-contained story, even though they have these hooks to the previous episodes, and they are part of this much larger, toy franchise. Like, I think you guys could come into this and watch these two episodes, 45 minutes of television, and get what was going on. Like, there's clearly conflict between G.I. Joe and Cobra. But all the characters you need to know for the story are introduced right up front, and you don't necessarily get to know the particulars of the bad guys, but it's clear that they're bad guys and they have schemes happening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's a kid's show for this time, so they know they have to provide a lot of context, especially in the two-parter.
Oh, man.
The first act is a recap. It's
Yes.
sort of just like a Dragon Ball Z episode.
Well, because there are so many plot points they set
it's
up
true,
in the first
yeah.
one. It's really dense, and
then this happened, and then this happened.
But this one really stuck with me as a kid because I didn't see it when it aired first in '84. I was just 2 when that aired. But by the time I was 5 or 6 was when I was watching reruns of G.I. Joe, and that's when I saw this one. And it seriously scarred me. Like the idea of just the melting of synthoids and just people screaming about they don't show death on G.I. Joe, but they will have a psychological breakdown of just a person going what is real? What is it?
The weird dream logic in this is almost Lynchian, in which it's like the amount of times Shipwreck passes out and then something weird as fuck happens to him is just astounding. And I honestly don't know how they got this on TV. It is very disturbing. I mean, I'm going to sleep at night.
Somebody had to be asleep at the switch.
I think so. Well, I mean, we were talking about it. These are the last 2 episodes of this production run, so maybe people weren't paying as close attention, or they thought, oh yeah, they know what they're doing. We don't have to watch over this as closely. So who knows?
It could be.
Yeah.
And Steve Gerber too. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he based some of this on real hallucinogenic experiences he had in the 70s as well.
Yeah.
You think he had a parrot that turned on a weird lamp? And
I think he saw parrots doing it.
G.I. Joe will return after these messages.
Catching Cobra's really tough, and Cobra's up to something bad with G.I. Joe.
Cobra! Cobra blew up the bridge! Bridge layer to the rescue! The Oshbacker will catch us!
Introducing the new Joes, Barbecue and Shipwreck.
We're gonna stop Cobra this time!
G.I. Joe.
After him! Joe!
G.I. Joe Bridge Layer comes with driver, or Striker comes with driver. Other figures and equipment sold separately from Hasbro.
Yo, Joe, Bob.
Hey everybody, it's me, Christian Slater.
You talk like me, you walk like me.
Visit Talking Critic for more.
We're having fun on this G.I. Joe episode of What a Cartoon.
We really are.
We want to thank Jeremy Parrish again for coming by, Bob's partner in Retronauts. And
yeah, he'll be back. He loves doing these things. This is our first trip to the 80s. We didn't actually mention that on the show itself. We have not done an 80s cartoon yet.
That's amazing that we haven't yet. Yeah, I mean, we're more children of the 90s than 80s '80s. I mean, look, I love the '80s, and I was born in '82, but still, when it comes to animation, the '80s, they get a bad rap, some mostly fairly.
Mostly deserved, yeah.
Yeah, and meanwhile, in the '90s, there was the animation renaissance that's it's easier to spend time in, but...
We'll go back to the 80s occasionally. There's great stuff I want to cover, like DuckTales and
Yeah.
Ninja Turtles and things like that.
And it's fun in episodes like this where the script can kind of elevate average at
Yeah.
best animation.
Better than normal for 85, but still bad.
But hey, if you're listening to this, we thank you for listening. But did you know that you could hear next week's episode right now and without any ads?
Yes, right now you could be listening to our take on the X-Men animated series show Out of the Past if you give to our Patreon. And how does that work, Henry? Even I forget.
Well, first you got to go to patreon.com/Talking Simpsons. That is the home to our sister show, Talking Simpsons, as well as What a Cartoon. If you sign up at the $5 level, you'll get a RSS code that gives you access to all of the podcasts we post and all of your podcast trackers. That includes the week early and ad-free What a Cartoon, the week early and ad-free Talking Simpsons, but that's only the beginning.
Yes, we have so many things that are exclusive on Patreon that are going to stay behind the paywall. Exclusive series like Talking Futurama and Talking Critic. We went through all of the episodes of The Critic and the first season of Futurama, and there will be more miniseries like that to come. We also have
only hear it there.
Only there. And we also have things like interviews with Simpsons writers and artists, season wrap-ups, deleted scenes from Simpsons seasons 5 and later. And there's even more stuff on top of that. We did a whole special about One Piece, like all of our bonus, and a whole special about our trip to LA, recording so many great podcasts.
Oh man, yes, yeah. And tons more cool stuff is on the way there. And also at the $10 premium level, you get access to all of the videos we've done to this point, which includes us going through all of the Simpsons shorts in chronological order to complete our Simpson-y breakdown. And we really learned a lot from those, which is reflected in our interview with David Silverman.
Great interview, great commentaries. And I want to tell you people, if you've never signed up for Patreon, it's super easy. And to access all of our bonus content, you can either use the Patreon app, or they will give you a code you drop into any player or podcatcher you use, and you would download our podcast just like you downloaded this free one. So it's so easy to do. And if you sign up now, you'll have dozens and dozens, days and days, if not weeks, of bonus podcasts you've never heard with us on them. And I think you would like that. If you've listened this far, I know you like it.
So please go and check that out at patreon.com/Talking Simpsons. And now back to Springfield, but not the Simpsons one, which is the other show we do.
Fight for freedom wherever there's trouble. G.I. Joe is there. G.I. Joe, American hero. G.I. Joe is there. It's G.I. Joe against Cobra and Destro, fighting to save the day. He never gives up. He's always there, fighting for freedom over land and air. G.I. Joe, American hero. G.I. Joe is there.
G.I. Joe is the code name for America's daring, highly trained Special Mission Force. Its purpose, to defend human freedom against Cobra, a ruthless terrorist organization determined to rule the world.
He never gives up. He'll stay till the fight's won. G.I. Joe will dare. G.I. Joe, American hero. G.I. Joe.
I watched this on Prime Video. They actually, Hasbro has this up in HD.
It's about as good as it'll look, yeah.
Yeah, it looks
I mean,
as good as...
you could see every time they color outside the lines. And I just it is because they have less money, but I just love how sometimes rough the characters look and how they're drawn. Like the lines aren't always connected, too. It's, again, very 70s and 80s anime.
Yeah.
I mean, these studios had to produce 55 times 22 minutes of animation, so
That's a lot.
It's
that's
great
a lot
work.
of that's a lot of drawings.
It's great work for what they were giving, for sure. And to have everybody in different outfits, too. Like, you don't break... That's like in He-Man, they always wore the same clothes.
Right. Well, and this you don't need to see Shipwreck in his dungarees because he's Shipwreck because he talks like this and he's got a parrot. That's a pretty specific character. So, like, by this point, kids knew the character. They loved their Shipwreck. Hooray. They had Polly.
It's also hard for me to see Shipwreck and not think of Shore Leave from Venture Brothers. It's just really...
It was hard for me to see any of this and not think of the Fensler films, G.I. Joe PSAs, which are not in this era of G.I. Joe. Where did they show up originally?
Actually, they are in this era.
So they're not on this Blu-ray. Okay, so they weren't on my copy.
They weren't on mine. Maybe Amazon was like, or whoever releases it now was like, these are jokes now, and we don't want people making fun of them.
I think basically there were a small number of these produced, and they weren't attached to a specific episode.
Got it. I was waiting for those, but yeah, that's how I and a lot of kids that are as old, a lot of kids like me, know about GI Joe was from the early 2000s, and when
wants a body massage?
Yes, and stop all the downloading or whatever.
Kids, I'm a computer.
Yeah.
But the real ones did teach me to not swim in lightning storms or
true.
how to block a bloody nose, like how to staunch bleeding.
They were valuable, and those were essential to getting G.I. Joe onto the airwaves because at this point, standards and practices said you can't have just something that's an advertisement. So they presented G.I. Joe as an educational experience with 30 seconds of education and 22 minutes of commercial.
God, I really loved when Animaniacs did the Wheel of Morality.
Yeah, it was a great one.
And at certain times, characters would win things by spinning the wheel. It was great.
But so, yes, it starts off with them looking for Professor Mulaney on the island.
Rob Mulaney.
Yes, G.I. Joe. I'm Lady J. And that's Shipwreck. Professor Mulaney? Come on, Ship. He needs nourishment. You remembered the rations, I hope.
Yeah, but this joker's gonna need more than a candy bar and instant noodle soup.
Boy.
I like that when he says candy bar, it then cuts to an opened candy bar.
Yeah.
But it just says candy on it, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
it's
okay.
just simply candy.
So
Couldn't
it's
sell
not an
candy.
advertisement.
They couldn't sell candy and toys.
Right. So one of the interesting things about this is they had a very small pool of voice talent for the characters and a lot of characters. So there was a lot of doubling up with the characters. And if I'm not mistaken, Dr. Mulaney or Professor Mulaney is Michael Bell, who also did the voice of Duke and who does the Crimson Twins.
I believe he played Angelica's dad on Rugrats.
That's right.
And he was the voice of the Country Crock unseen guy.
No
the
kidding.
unseen guy in the Country Crock commercials.
I did not know that.
And Quacker Jack on Darkwing Duck. I know all of Michael Bell's roles.
Duke is him at normal, and meanwhile Mulaney is him at wacky.
Yeah,
that's definitely it's so the Quacker Jack voice.
Yes.
But and as he's explaining his special chemical that he's working on, he says
it's basic. Okay, so his chemical is basically like
it's like Ice Nine.
It's Ice Nine, but way deadlier. Instead of turning the ocean into ice, it just turns it into a huge bomb that would blow up the whole planet.
Which the logistics of that, I'm just curious as to how that, like, once you add the formula, all the water just explodes.
I think so. Okay. I think it like destroys the bond between hydrogen and oxygen and turns it into like releases the energy there.
It sounds like a hyper chain reaction. That's to cut to the end of this. When Shipwreck escapes by setting it off, it's like you better hope that was only to just the plumbing on this island, because if it touches
you're
the
on
ocean,
an island,
you've killed every human.
You've destroyed the planet, sir.
The guy gives a nice, like, I would call it a Kojima-esque explanation where if you don't think about it too hard, it sounds legit. But I'm actually surprised on the kids' cartoon they talk about the chemical composition of water. Again, that's a detail I didn't think they would add to this kids' cartoon. And
as he explains all that, he then is leaving the secret. There's one last piece to the puzzle, and it's inside Shipwreck.
Neuralink. It transmits data electrochemically directly to the brain.
You put the formula in there?
Hey, it ain't like he flushed it down the sewer, you know. Anyway, if it's really in my noodle, how come I don't remember it?
It's locked in your subconscious, where Cobra cannot force it from you.
But how do we get it out?
With this code word. Upon hearing that word, he'll sink into a trance and recite the formula.
Like muck, I will. You're gonna be there to tell him yourself.
It's a real Johnny Mnemonic twist here, where he's storing things inside of his brain with a very convenient piece of technology.
Didn't this air around the time Johnny Mnemonic was written?
I don't know, but I can look it up.
I also love that he just pulls it out of his pocket and just like, oh, he didn't bring food with him, or he's out of food, but he's still got this in his pocket. Which that invention alone, it's like Cobra should steal that from him if they're going to steal that anything.
Right. You know, one of the interesting things about this, kind of irrelevant to what we're talking about now, but this was supposed to be an advertisement, so it's advertising characters and toys and so forth, but there's not a lot of vehicles in this episode. You get the flying submarine that they make their landing on, and you see some Cobra aircraft and, you know, the big aircraft carrier, the Flag, but in the second episode of this, you barely see any vehicles at all. It does a really kind of crappy job of selling you toys.
I wasn't aware that the aircraft character was just called Flag.
The
So-
USS flag.
I was FLAGG or okay, yeah. So I was confused for a while until I put it all together. But they're like, I was on the flag.
Though I did love it, reminded me so much that they have to say, they don't just say like he's in a boat. He's like, oh, the shark's in trouble. Oh, it's a rattler. They have to say all of the names so the kids know which one to buy at the store.
Oh, yeah.
So, lingering question: Johnny Mnemonic, written by William Gibson in 1981.
Oh.
So pretty close.
I see.
And I also love the continuity here that when he does the whisper of the code word, Polly is right there and even lifts up its wing
I
like
guess
it's putting
Chekhov's bird right there.
I got a good laugh out of all of the parrot acting. I own a parrot, by the way, so I got a good hoot out of all of that.
Well, there are some little bits of incidental animation for Polly where you're like, a bird enthusiast drew this character.
Yeah.
Like he's shuffling back and forth.
The way the bird jumps up and down is parrots do that when they're excited. So I did appreciate that. Somebody on the staff had a bird, or at least studied them.
And as they're trying to make their escape, though, Cobra descends upon them. We get to hear so many of the wonderful, just laser, like there's like a squishiness to the laser. I don't know. It's better than just the lasers you'd hear on Transformers. Even I just love those lasers.
I assume these are all old Gundam sound effects that they bought or pulled out of a vault.
I could see that. I could see. Also, I forgot what a badass Lady J was too, and just how many like the women are really strong in this group.
Yeah, I will say this about G.I. Joe, especially the cartoon. You know, growing up watching this, reading this, there aren't a lot of female characters in the series, but the ones who do appear have very prominent roles. And I think someone sat down, because, you know, nerds do this sort of thing, and documented how many lines of dialogue every character has across the series. The number one character is Cobra Commander, because he's the bad guy instigating everything in every episode. But number 2 and number 3 are Lady J and the Baroness. Like,
Wow.
it's just a given that the women have a big role in this. And Scarlet never gets to be much more than just Duke's girlfriend, but Lady J and Baroness both are major actors in this series and both have very prominent roles who don't, you know, need people to help them. Lady J, like, she takes down airplanes by throwing javelins at them. She's the badass character on G.I. Joe. Like, no one else is that tough.
She's like shoots a crossbow at an airplane.
No, Scarlet is the
Okay,
crossbow. Lady J
okay.
shoots javelins.
Those
For some reason, they
airplanes-
didn't give the women guns.
Okay, weird.
Yeah, that is an odd choice. Well, and then you compare it to it's hard not to just constantly compare it to Transformers, because it really was its sister series. It was Hasbro's other show. I mean, it even came from the same Takara toy line. But you compare it to Transformers, there are basically no women, and they created a girl bot in the Transformers movie, RC, who I believe has the same voice as Lady J. And so that was it. They never had girl Transformers, and rarely did they even hang out with human women either.
Right. So the writers were actually a group of raging liberals. They were like super leftist, writers, and had very left-leaning personal politics. And so they had this kind of personal conflict, like, well, we're writing something that glorifies the military and violence. So they did what they could to mitigate that. And, you know, I think, you know, putting women in positions of prominence and authority was part of that. And so I don't know, like, I grew up reading and watching this, and to me it doesn't seem strange to have strong female characters or characters as the primary, you know, focus of a story, because that's how I've always seen it and just assumed, you know, that's normal. But I guess not, based on the internet.
No, the internet says disagrees with you on that, Jeremy. But so the Rattlers are attacking the shark and the flag and what's the other ship what's the plane that the G.I. Joes have?
Sky Striker.
Sky Striker.
There's also some fire bats in there.
Oh yes, the smaller ones.
These all have trademarks after their name, by the way.
I always thought the Cobra ones looked cooler. Like,
they do.
They're just more sleekly designed. They're not just like standard military planes.
The Rattlers actually are. They're A-10 Warthogs, so they're like air-to-ground bombers. So, of course, that's what they have facing the Sky Strikers, like air-to-air, and then they have the air-to-air craft in the cartoon, like doing strafing runs on the ground, because why not?
And
it's all toys.
We get a quick line from Roadblock here, which I had to include.
Here's a gourmet dish for you. I call it fire bat stew.
He's the rhymer, right?
Yes.
Is that explained in any way, or does he just like,
No.
I like rhyming?
He just rhymes.
I don't want to say it's because he's the black guy on the team and would do rapping things.
At least he's not roller skating.
Yes, yeah. I always liked Roadblock. He was played by The Rock in the second G.I. Joe film.
Oh, okay.
He was one of the few left out.
Yeah, Roadblock is one of the more popular characters from the cartoon. I mean, he's like this really strong guy, and he rhymes a lot, and also he's a chef.
Oh, yeah, and he's the one who gets to hang out with Cobra Commander the entire time in the G.I. Joe movie.
Once a man.
They lose Mulaney. He might have died. They lose Mulaney in the confusion. We got to get Shipwreck on the boat because he's got secret. And as the flag is under attack, it's man overboard.
Come on, you hunk of substandard plastic, open up! Let me out of this tub! Man overboard! Man overboard!
That's a disturbing scene too, as he drowns in his sea coffin.
Yeah, in the world of G.I. Joe, safety standards have never been higher in ships. Like, you always get out of it. There's always a parachute. You always escape. This is the one time somebody's trapped. He's like, no.
I wonder if they were taking shots at the toy line because he calls it a substandard hunk of plastic.
Hey, that sounds...
It's like, why is your submarine made of plastic?
That's true. Boy, I bet you're right there. And also that they end on a commercial break. And that's a real thing to leave kids with, too, of like, I don't know, maybe Shipwreck's dead, kids. He might have just drowned.
Now, a message from our sponsors.
Yes, yeah. Which
You're going to love Chips Ahoy, kids.
I hear this in my head so many times. I love this.
G.I. Joe will return after these messages.
Nice.
I think I was getting to see a Kool-Aid commercial or for the Nintendo cereal.
Or for G.I. Joe toys.
Yeah, or for hopefully for G.I. Joe.
You can drown them yourself.
So, yeah, quite a place in the first act. Then we come into the second act, and Shipwreck is certainly confused.
Oh, Daddy.
The last time I saw you, you couldn't even breathe out of water. And I've never seen her in my life.
But you're my daddy.
I ain't nobody's daddy. Gray. Look, what happened to Lady J and the flag?
The flag? The flag sank 6 years ago.
6 years ago?
You really don't remember?
Nothing. Tell me all of it.
Okay, but I feel silly telling this story to the man who lived it. I guess I should start with the flag.
She could have edited that the story a little bit, I think. Did I need to know about Pearl Harbor? I don't think so.
Yeah, like, just say I lived, all right?
Yeah.
Like, no, that's... well, so when he wakes up, it really is also... He's talking about Kojima. That is like the opening to MGS5.
Yeah, that's true.
And also just this realization, like, it is such a book can see... I also feel like they're dealing with, like, PTSD a lot in this. Like, or Vietnam syndrome or whatever they would have called it then before they had the term for it. Of just this man scarred by his life in the military, and now his whole world doesn't make sense to him. He's like, I'm supposed to be killing people. I'm not supposed to have a child. And same with him, like, going gray. Like, he went gray in 6 years. That's pretty harsh.
But really, what hell is
Stress.
worse? What hell is worse, war or the suburbs? Think about it. That's my social commentary.
So in this episode, Shipwreck wakes up in Springfield, which is significant because it's a huge part of the comic series, and the name Springfield comes from the same place that The Simpsons Springfield comes from. It's supposed to be the generic every town.
Yeah.
In the comics, Cobra eventually evolves from being like generic terrorist organization to a terrorist organization that is kind of homegrown, and its center is a town called Springfield in Anytown, USA, basically. Cobra Commander uses that as his base of power. He's basically rabble-rousing. You know, it's like modern-day Rust Belt, basically saying, you know, the government has left you behind, no one cares about you. Let's join the Cobra organization and we'll set things right. We'll take power ourselves.
A homegrown militia of dissatisfied middle Americans.
And eventually they get their own independent island off the Gulf of Mexico, on an island that they raise out of the ocean bed with some crazy scheme, which is one of the few times Shipwreck actually shows him in the comic, actually. Springfield is a huge part of the comic's lore, but here, this is like the one time it shows up, and it's basically like this fake town that they've created, spoilers, to get the formula for Mulaney's chemicals out of Shipwreck's mind.
They put a lot of money into building up this Springfield, man.
Yeah,
did.
it's sort of like a Truman Show style
Yeah.
game they're running here.
They billions likely put into this, but that's
They have
classic.
to make fake people even.
There's a whole city just on an island, and there's a very complex oubliette system underneath the city.
And it's all, though, I mean, that's classic Cobra as well, that they invest a lot of money on the stupidest stuff. Sometimes they'll put no money in something like, well, we did spend $3 billion on this, but let's just leave this to a trainee. They'll deal with it. But so he gets to hear his whole story about how, I got to say, as a crafted story to fool him, it's a pretty good one of no, and you stopped him, and you were the one who caught Cobra Commander. Aren't you proud of yourself?
Can't believe you don't remember that part.
And I also like him say, my uncle. He only thinks of his one living relative,
Right.
too. And yeah, also, all good comic nerds of the 60s, Steve Gerber obviously was a big fan of The Prisoner. So you get that a ton in this, which, including his address.
Number 6 Village Drive. We're home?
Of course we are, Daddy.
Nice house.
How you feeling, sailor? How you feeling?
Well, at least one thing hasn't changed.
I love his dissatisfaction. I'm not free. No, 6 years and I still got this bird.
You gotta take care of
Parents
this
live a long
bird.
time,
I
man.
know. My bird's about to turn 16, and he's got 50 years ahead of him.
And meanwhile, but you love your bird. Unlike
yeah.
Shipwreck, he appreciates Polly, and Polly seems to care about him, and when he's not driving him crazy. But again, on a stealth mission, he's just screaming the entire time.
You don't need to bring the bird.
And also, the bird is sentient. He's not.
True.
He's not a bird brain. He just has conversations with him. And he's voiced. I don't think we said it before. He's voiced by the same person as Shipwreck. It's the same actor.
It's a very common cartoon parrot voice.
Yeah, actually, Iago rips off so many of these bits here.
I mean, I think the Flintstones probably started it.
Yeah, that's true. But yeah, number 6. That's a reference to the prisoner character.
Oh,
number
yeah,
6 as
okay,
well. That's why
okay.
it's number 6 Lane. And I like his boring house. There's a lot of real thought into his home life. Not just he has a boring house, but also that he has a I guess man cave or just the dad room with all of his hunting trophies and guns on the wall.
And I was actually surprised to see him in bed with his wife later.
Yeah.
And then I was thinking, did he do anything with that synthoid lady?
Boy,
I gotta know. I gotta know.
I don't know. He's passing out
wanna
too
know.
much. I don't think he can
It's true.
do much else.
He does pass out about 43 times in this these 2 episodes.
That's another that's another thing too. The way they have him keep passing out, what if he fell and hit his head on a coffee table? That's a real waste of your time.
Or
Cobra
what if he was
Commander.
driving?
Yeah. He's not going to eat a tuna fish sandwich while driving.
True.
They also meets Scarlet in quotes, and I like that to show you the war is over, she's put her crossbow on her car instead. That's a level of thought. They have fake wedding pictures. Cobra really put in the effort on this one. I mean, it is their ultimate weapon. They need to get that formula. But.
So in the comic, the first time they come across Springfield, Shipwreck's not involved, but a couple of the Joes do end up getting taken prisoner, and they are drugged, they're fed drugged food and water in the prison cell, and Cobra Commander's son, unbeknownst to them, is also a prisoner down there, and shows them how to neutralize the toxins by holding the food up to a light bulb so the heat breaks down the chemicals and stuff. That's where they introduce the character Dr. Venom in the comics, who has this thing called the brainwave scanner, where he can read people's minds and also implant memories there. So I feel like there's a lot of influence from that issue of the comic kind of taken into this and reprocessed into something that's a little more appropriate to the cartoon.
During one of his first knockouts, when he just this one was just falling asleep, which in what we know about concussions now, you don't let a person fall asleep like that. Though it's not really a concussion. But anyway, then he has a bad dream.
What did Mulaney say to you? If you value your life, speak. Not going to talk, eh? Then kiss tomorrow goodbye.
Hector, oh darling. feeling? A bad dream?
The worst.
Yeah, so he's shot in the head in his dream.
That's
Again,
pretty shocking.
Really extreme.
You can't do that on most cartoons either. Even if it's a laser gun, pointing it at the screen and firing it.
Yeah.
That was a big no-no in the world of Batman as well. I know that from their rules. But
This was the free will in the 80s, man. This was Reagan's time.
Yeah, the free market will decide if kids should see guns pointed at them.
Well, though, I think if a character gets shot, that would have scarred me less than a character screaming about what the nature of reality is. Like that scarred me far more in this. And I love Cobra Commander. He's so great. He's so funny. He's such like a dick in this, and he's so whiny. And Chrome Face is my favorite commander. What's your guys's?
Yeah, with the battle. Actually, I really like the battle armor one that showed up a few years later.
Okay.
It's like full body armor where you're like, oh yeah, that actually seems like something that, would be sensible in combat as opposed to a face mask.
What's the question? The best?
The mask or the hood?
I like his casual hood. In fact, when I was watching this, I tweeted a scene layout that made me just laugh of Cobra sitting at a giant desk and he's talking to the parrot. The parrot's like very small on his desk. He's just like looking over at it with his arms crossed. So it's very casual. He puts on the casual mask. Is there something going on under the mask in terms of like story wise? Is that something that you talk about a lot?
His face looks like a snake.
Okay.
Yeah, which that's kind of revealed in the movie with the whole Cobra society. And that also has another of my favorite all-time Cobra Commander scenes where just every one of his lieutenants surrounds him and they're like, no, you suck. You failed at this. You failed this. Like, he's like, all of you betraying me.
He's a real Zap Brannigan.
How did he get in charge? He's just this idiot. But so then he drinks some tea and passes out again.
What did my lady tell you? Speak!
Did you tell anyone else?
The information now!
Or we'll destroy your happy home.
Answer, or this is but the beginning of your torment.
Hector, please wake up!
Jesus.
Mara, sweetheart, I think I'm going crazy.
It's another thing I think that would probably give kids nightmares. The idea of your family home burning down.
Yeah. And what if your father went crazy?
Yeah.
This whole episode is nightmare fuel.
It really is. Like, I'm not kidding. When I saw, so they go to his job, which he's started a business with the other water dudes, Torpedo and
the water crew.
The water crew.
A Squirtle Squad.
And there's also a funny bit where he like kind of creeps on Flint, like, hey, pretty hot lady there.
It's one of those times where they actually acknowledge it's like, no, the character heard you say that in that aside. I like how they put it's like, I heard that.
Yeah, this is my fiance. It was cute to see what his job would be after that. But Shipwreck is just losing it. Nothing's making sense to him. And then he sees Roadblock. And this was the time when I saw this in this replay, I was like, this was the one that scarred me as a kid, seeing the first character melt.
Oh, yeah.
Roadblock? Hey, Roadblock! It's me, Shipwreck! I'll find him when he comes out. Roadblock! What's going on in there?
Sure was toasty.
Help! He's melting! Somebody help!
I gotta say, the very cartoon stock slime effects make the horror less extreme, and they could have been added because of that. But yeah, it's still a freaky scene.
Just this character who, as far as you know, as a kid, well, so as a kid, I hadn't seen the original Synthoids ones. I guess if you had been a regular viewer, you would have known, like, these are Synthoids. They're not the real people. The way, especially with Roadblock, when they draw him melting, he has a separate eye that melts outside of it.
There's some, like, real horror comic stuff going on there.
It's a real Akira move.
Yeah. I wonder if they got away with some of the melting in this, too, because they say, like, oh, no, you can be reconstituted, so technically they're not dead.
Yeah.
But he freaks out. He gets in a fight. He gets sent to jail where he's offered a tuna fish sandwich, which like pretty nice. I love how he goes like, thanks for caring about my nutrition.
He takes a bite, he falls over, and like a trap door is opened. And that was pretty funny because I was like, how many more times is this going to happen?
He's been conscious for maybe 20 minutes since waking up in Springfield.
On The Prisoner, did they just gas you a bunch? I remember The Simpsons when they did their Prisoner parody in like the early 2000s. There was a lot of jokes about gassing people.
You get gassed a lot in both The Prisoner and in the parodies. And then though they knock him out just to drop him into a hole to be like just made fun of by his old bosses. I especially like how the Synthoid Scarlet says like, and you don't even know why. Like, ha ha ha, you're so stupid. And this, I swear, I don't know if I even saw part 2 at the time, but right the next day. But when I saw this to be continued, and it left me with no resolution on that day, it was probably one of the first to be continued things I ever saw as a kid too. This moment here really fucked me up.
Who's doing this to me? What do you want? No, this can't be happening to me. No. Oh, no. They're alive. They're still alive. I didn't mean to hurt you. Stay back. Stay back.
I mean, Cobra should get out of terrorism and into professional gaslighting. He's very good at it. The guy's like, what's happening? What is reality?
Well, also, the Cobra should be doing a lot more than this if they have the ability to make, well, speaking of S.H.I.E.L.D., life model decoys. Like, they can just make almost perfect copies of something so long as you don't touch them.
Replace the president and make Cobra legal.
That was the previous episode.
What?
The Synthoids, when they first showed up, not the president, but Congress.
Okay. Oh, wow.
At the end of the first G.I. Joe movie, they also replaced the president.
Yep.
Jonathan Pryce was the president, and they replaced him.
President Zartan.
And so that's where it leaves off in the to be continued. And so when it picks back up, like you said, you get it is 223 seconds in the file before they finally say, and now the conclusion.
You're right. It is a lot to go through, but they're also sort of indulging in it because they're like, that's less things to animate and it's cheaper and less story to tell. So all of our jobs are easier now.
Yeah. So when we come back to part 2, things are moving a whole lot faster. They're kind of done fucking with his brain and pretending he even has a real life. And so they're just, phase 1 is over and it's time for phase 2 of him being tortured. And that's where we get Tomax and Zaymot.
The Crimson Twins.
Don't touch that dial.
Crimson Guard Cadet Deming.
We'll handle this interrogation.
We consider the experience
essential to her training.
Your first time?
I've run the simulator.
The real thing is considerably more demanding.
I feel like those two were taken from a magic show in Vegas or something. I was like, what's their story?
Their backstory is that they are from Corsica. It's a reference to Shakespeare.
Oh.
Believe it or not.
That's too highbrow for me.
It's so highfalutin.
I only know it from the Cheech and Chong film, the Corsican brothers.
Oh, their best movie.
Yes.
So this part's weird because they introduced this completely new character who doesn't exist in any other media, the Crimson Guard Cadet Deming.
Yeah.
Who, I guess she's a cadet, so she's blue, not crimson.
It's part of their torture. I feel like it's also part of their cruelty that they're like, we're going to make you do it. Dirty your soul by torturing this person to prove your loyalty to Cobra. And also when the synthoid of the doctor turns him down, they just kill him.
Cadet Deming, full power.
No.
What seems to be
the problem, Doctor?
She's inexperienced. The full power of the chamber could drive her mad and damage Delgado as well.
The Doctor?
He's developed opinions of his own, obviously defective.
So synthoids have free will and morality?
Apparently.
It's weird.
It's a defect.
That's a better story.
They're subjectable to some level, but I took it as them saying it's sort of like Smurfette, that this is a clone that is made too well that is now imitating the goodness of the person it is based on. And but this torture sequence, it's horrifying.
It's harsh, and it's oddly sexually charged when she's climbing on top of him.
She jumps on top of him. I noticed that they animated her from the overhead view, so she's not straddling him. But when she jumps on him, at first you're like, "Whoa, what?"
She hits the disco button and jumps on him.
And then all of a sudden, the ghosts from the Ark of the Covenant start flying around. And they all turn out to be the Cobra High Command.
There's a cool demon ghost version of his parrot too that's flying around. It's
it turns into a phoenix or something.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
But and that's how they find out about the code word. And again, stupid Cobra, by saying that Lady J was dead and she was the only one of G.I. Joe they tell him is dead. Then he's like, well, I don't know. And the only person who knew it is dead. They're like, shit, you lie. Just the way she screams, you lie. But Cobra Commander is not pleased.
You fools! You should have realized Mulaney would take such a precaution. The sailor is useless to us without Lady J or Mulaney himself.
Hardly, Commander.
All we lack
is the code word.
And just how do you propose to get it?
Leave that to us.
Meanwhile, we recommend
You redouble your efforts to find Mulaney.
Your recommendation was not solicited.
Being a good manager there.
Yeah,
Using some manager talk.
I love that. It's
Vacation denied.
Again, voiced by Starscream. It's like if Starscream was in charge of the Transformers. And he's just very bad at it. Cobra Commander's so fucking funny. I think by now they know he's really funny.
Yeah, after making 60 episodes, they figured it out.
They know he's a butt of jokes. And yeah, then also Cobra Commander then calls Baroness, and even Baroness is like, maybe you should redouble your efforts. He's like, why are you guys
I'm getting it from all sides.
It's so hard being Cobra. And at that point, too, they've just given up. They're just going to keep him their plan with Shipwreck is to keep him unconscious 99% of the time and just repeat words to him.
Aren't they causing some serious brain damage by knocking him out this much?
I would think
He's
so.
not going to remember anything soon.
I would think he'd be dead in about 5 days of this. Like, just like, no, poison him again into catatonic. And this is the dictionary part 2. I just love how like fucking snippy Cobra Commander is here with them.
Aerostat, aerostatics, aerothermodynamics, erugo, airy, esculus, esculapian.
The computer is reciting
The entire contents
of the unabridged
Oxford English Dictionary.
The code word must be in there someplace.
Very clever. Why, we'll have the answer in 6 or 7 years. Even I didn't expect failure this soon.
We're so passive aggressive and bitter.
And little does he realize that even just reading the dictionary won't work because it's a more complicated code. They use 2 words, more than 2. My God, he's a genius.
And he's just so pissed off, so tired of it. And there's also a mistake in there. He's in his hood mask the entire cartoon, except for one scene, just like one cut where he stands up. Then it's his chrome mask animated.
Maybe it was old animation or something.
Yeah, they have a lot of scenes in his control room there. And again, they spent all that fucking money, but not on beard dye. They needed more permanent beard dye.
God, it's the little things, man.
Budget cuts.
That's when it finally hits Shipwreck, and he is going to feed the woman some of her own medicine right before. Then we get a bird fight.
It's a cool bird fight.
It's a cool bird fight where we get to see that the real Polly is here, who comes in saying, "Go, Joe." So you know it's the real Polly, who then also has a synthoid disruptor, which I'm guessing it's created in the previous synthoid episode.
Oh, I don't even know. I haven't watched that one.
Let's say yes.
Okay.
And he's finally free, so we get to see that this Polly that had been hanging out with Cobra Commander this whole time was a fakeroo.
And all of this, the hospital, the whole town, it's all a fakeroo.
You're hot.
The flag didn't even go down, did it?
You're hotter.
And Lady J must still be alive. And Cobra's trying to get me to reveal Mulaney's secret formula. But Lady J's the only one who knows the blasted code word. So that means Mara lied to me. She's on Cobra's side. Wait a minute. How do I know you're not another phony?
Remember that night in Annapolis?
Ooh.
Okay, I'm convinced.
Boy.
TMI.
I will say all you need to do to win a parrot's loyalty is have fruit, and that's it. So.
I wonder what type of fruit he shares with his bird.
Probably all fruits.
Yes.
Doesn't seem like he fed him anything in this entire episode. I mean, that parrot is worthy of being a G.I. Joe parrot.
He should be like Supreme Commander, the mastermind. So I think Jeremy has to get out of here to catch a plane, but thanks for joining us, Jeremy. Do you want to plug our stuff before you go?
Yeah, me, Jeremy Parrish, am a person. What do the Retronauts with Bob? So check that out at retronauts.com. Like this show, it's supported through Patreon, patreon.com/retronauts. And we talk about old video games and things that are tangentially related to video games. And I wouldn't be surprised if someday soon we do an episode about video games related to G.I. Joe. Just you watch. So please check that out, and thank you guys for having me on the show.
Yeah, and we'll try to get Jeremy on one of these every time we do Retronauts in SF. So
every few months.
We'll make him do it.
Yeah. They'll drag me and put on the lamp and start melting. It'll be crazy.
We'll knock him out at least 4 times.
I have a tuna sandwich here for you, Jerry.
Oh, no.
Wait till you get on the plane to eat it.
Thanks for caring about my nutrition, Henry. All right, thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you, Jeremy.
After Jeremy's gone now, let's wrap it up here. We've got the code word is revealed. He is hanging around. Well, first, it's Shipwreck exploring the underground and seeing the real Springfield.
Right, and he's wandering through a bunch of weird tests.
Yeah, I love seeing the synthoid fighting ring. Like they have just like smaller synthoids and they're betting on them. There's a real internal life to Cobra that you're seeing. In this.
There's one like poorly done sight gag where he makes a scientist spill chemicals on his hair and it burns off. I think it was just like they couldn't communicate what the visual gag is to the overseas studio, so just sort of awkward.
Well, comedy, this is an action show, so I could see that the animators there maybe didn't have as good a handle on comedy, perhaps. And then we get our big revelation, the thing that was set up at the very start, with Polly listening closely with his wing up to his ear. He knows the blasted code word.
Operation Hot Water. It's Mulaney's formula. It's gotta be. We could blow Springfield off the map with this stuff. If we knew the code word to get the secret out of my skull.
Code word, frogs in winter, frogs in winter.
Deoxynitrotriphosphate, ammonium hydrochloride fulminate, potassium triglyceride, and thulium isotope 385. The secret ingredient.
It's really irresponsible to tell the kids at home how to make this.
Yeah, you know what? He's telling people how to make bombs. It's dangerous.
This is the real anarchist cookbook for kids, the animated series.
Though it's, oh God, I was waiting the whole time of like, so wait, are we ever going to hear this code word? There's no Lady J around. I missed it in the first viewing that Polly was there.
I missed the giant funny parrot putting a wing up to his ear.
It's quite silly when you go back and watch it. It's a really good secret.
You just read it as like a fun animal sight gag. You're not thinking, oh, the parrot is listening and he'll tell him later. So maybe it's a fun misdirect.
Yeah, though when you look back on it later, you're like, oh yeah, well Polly doesn't normally stand on anybody's shoulders but Shipwreck's, but in this case he does on Lady J's to hear the code word. And though also just the idea that the parrot's going to stay the code word, like that feels like old detective novel work right there. Like, well, who would have heard it? The parrot. The parrot is saying who killed him.
Parrots don't say what you want them to say on command.
Are they not people who can... I think the most reality stretching of the parrot's abilities is when Shipwreck has to do his own exposition. So he's just like, so I didn't die on the flag, and I'm being held here. And you came here to save me, and all the rest of the and the parrot just has to go like, getting warmer, sailor.
Yeah, I don't think a parrot could parse all of that information and then reflect upon it.
And but so Shipwreck has made the hydrogen bomb, and then all the cool characters of Cobra pop in there, and this is a really cool scene. I like I like this scene because you rarely get interactions between Joes and Cobras for this long. You also don't get scenes about like bluffs and like people being held at gunpoint.
Yeah,
and also this really comes down to the idea that like Deathstroke is the only intelligent person in Cobra. Everyone else is a moron.
When they all rush into the room, it's a lot to ask a show of this budget to have every villain in the room at once.
Yes.
And they are so poorly drawn in that one shot. It's like a cardboard standee of all of the villains, and no one is moving, and no one is emoting or anything.
Maybe they're all synthoids.
It could be. It was all synthoids, folks.
It turns water into an explosive, and I just set it loose in your drainage system.
Fool, the mixture can only be ignited by a trigger explosion. That match will do nothing.
You're bluffing.
Am I?
Yeah, I think you are. Okay, I guess you weren't bluffing.
Let's smear the blighter.
No! You'll ignite the explosive!
That scene with the bluffing, if paced better, it could be out of the Venture Brothers. If paced differently, I feel like it could be like a good twist on that old standoff.
And I forgot to mention it before the Venture Brothers thing when Jeremy was talking about S.H.I.E.L.D. versus Hydra. That's also why in the Venture Brothers world, the S.H.I.E.L.D. and Hydra / G.I. Joe and Cobra things are the same thing. Like normally the S.H.I.E.L.D. characters are written to be S.H.I.E.L.D. style OSI, but then other times they do become become like G.I. Joe. And then meanwhile, they're facing Sphinx, who half the time are like Hydra, half the time like Cobra. And yeah, that timing, it's just a little off.
A little slow.
Like, there should have been a real sound effect for the poof of gas that doesn't kill them.
And there should have been someone instructing all of these people to be like, all right, we're going to go into this room. That volatile chemical could be there. Nobody fire anything because it will destroy our entire base.
That moron who's just like, let's smear the blighter, which his plan is like, I'm going to shoot him, which I wonder too if Destro realizes like, I have watched all of you guys never shoot anyone ever, so you're definitely going to miss and shoot the sink. Don't do it.
I know the rules of this show.
Yeah. Destro is the one smart guy, he's the guy who turns on Cobra Commander the most in just is constantly saying like, you suck, you're such an idiot. Oh yeah, actually want to just go backwards to one last favorite Cobra Commander being whiny line of mine.
The hospital will page us.
If there's anything to report.
Good. At least we know we won't be interrupted.
God, man. He needs to chill out a little bit. He needs a vacation.
He's a bad manager, shitting all over his underlings there. No wonder they're being so like snipey and snarky with him back.
They need a good company retreat. Do some trust falls, some team building exercises, a little bit of improv.
So then all the Joes descend on Springfield as it is exploding, and just he's lit all the water on fire, which is nuts. Like.
Again, how far does that go?
Yeah, what if that water reaches the sewers, this drains into the ocean?
It's very much like Jeremy mentioned the book Cat's Cradle, in which the Ice Nine basically causes an apocalypse. Mm-hmm. Ice Nine is the chemical that makes all water like harden or like...
It makes it freeze.
Yeah.
And just forever. It never melts. And it spreads out. So if you drop it into the ocean, it's just the world's over.
I think that's my favorite Vonnegut book.
Yeah,
and it's a short one too. If you want to check it out, it's great.
I like that one a lot, and it is. I haven't read a ton of his books, but it's also my favorite because it's just so short, and also like the chapters are so short too. So you really feel like you're getting somewhere. Like, man, I'm 8 chapters in. So the Joes descend on the exploding Springfield as Shipwreck heads home to try and save his wife and daughter, which again, I just love. It really does feel like a Vietnam, like coming home type film thing too. He's just like, I don't know who you are.
Yeah. And this show really ends on I was comparing it to Batman. It ends on just a down note, like a very sad down note in which Batman would end on all the time.
Yes. So here's the family reunion.
Hi, Daddy. Yes, darling. Welcome home. To stay.
Why? I mean, I thought you loved me.
Mara, don't! End of the line, synthoid suckers!
Synthoids. They were synthoids.
Boy.
Polly is smarter than him to realize they're synthoids. It didn't hit him the whole time.
And he seems to have grown attached to his synthoid family.
Yeah, which I like that. It makes it all the more... I mean, he did start to think like, oh, this is my daughter. I've made a life. And I think, too, that kid is taken right out of the character packs of a kid they drew in Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. Like,
it's a very, it fell out of the Kid Factory.
Yeah, and a very 80s kid voice, because they didn't hire voice actors.
Yeah, that was one of the 2 female voice actresses on the show.
And this is his nightmare come true. He was told, we'll destroy your happy home, and now it's all on fire. Though he probably should have thought of that when he blew up the island. He's like, well, I am exploding this island. That includes my family. I also forgot to mention the car wash bit. When I saw them first go into the car wash, I thought car wash, more like brainwash. And then they say it out loud in the show.
They couldn't avoid making that joke.
But so this, we get to the ever-loving end.
Shipwreck, is that you? Oh.
You old sea dog, you're alive.
We thought we'd lost you. Shipwreck? What happened? Was there something important in that house?
Nah, nothing important. Just a dream or two.
Aw.
Come on, let's go home.
The final shot is just the horror being reflected in his eyes. And I really feel like watching this as an adult, and I'm not into G.I. Joe or the world, or I really know nothing about it. I was like, I think now he's resentful of his life in G.I. Joe. And he was like, I could be a suburban dad. This is what I really want. Let's just go.
If only Cobra was defeated, this is the freedom I'd have.
But I also think he slept with his goo wife.
I think so,
and
too.
he misses her a lot.
Yeah, I have a feeling he slept with that goo wife. And it's also, though, it is his dream of Mara. Mara still does exist. She's just she can't live above water. So, because she has too much fish DNA in her. And it reminds me, too, of... I think this actually came before it, so they're not ripping it off, but it reminds me, too, of a classic Superman story that Alan Moore wrote called For the Man Who Has Everything, where he is trapped in a dream world, his fantasy world, where he has a family, and to get back into the real world, he basically has to kill his family to be free of it. And that's similar there, too. Though, yeah, I also wonder if this is like the creators of the show going like, boy, G.I. Joe has destroyed my family. Like, I have to sacrifice everything to do this cartoon show.
Perhaps.
And yeah, that you get to see what life after the war could look like, which makes it an interesting fantasy in general, because obviously if the G.I. Joe show was to continue, the war can never end. So they're never free.
Endless war.
Just like the prisoner. The prisoner's never free either. He's not going to get out.
Not even in the last episode does he leave?
Nah, not really.
Okay, I feel like I need to watch that show. I know it's good.
It's rather ambiguous.
Yeah.
But hey, you don't need to watch the show. Well, also, too, another prisoner thing, he is encapsulated in a bubble of goo, just like they did on The Prisoner as well, or to Marge Simpson in The Joy of Sect on The Simpsons.
There's a great joke in that Prisoner episode. It's not a great episode, by the way, but I think Homer is running from one of those bubbles and he just pops them.
Yeah.
And one of the henchmen is like, why do we keep using bubbles? And the other one says, shut up, that's why.
It was fun to revisit this. For me, it was like re-exploring childhood fears, because this scared the crap out of me. The idea that people around you could be fake, or the whole world could be lying to you. Like, as somebody who is sometimes a little paranoid or anxious, just being introduced as a child to the idea that what if the whole world is a lie? What if everyone's lying to you and they're all fake? Like, it's a terrifying prospect, far more than if I watched characters get shot with lasers.
Again, I only know these characters through the Fensler Films PSA parodies, but revisiting this, or visiting it for the first time rather, I was surprised by the level of maturity on display. It's also corny as hell and built to sell toys, but they were trying to do something fairly intelligent with this formula, and I can respect that. And I really feel that I don't know if there's anything that's as smart as this in this series, but I was pretty impressed by what I saw. And again, there were some genuinely disturbing scenes. I wasn't like gripping my armrest with terror or anything. I was just like, wow, they went this far. So I imagine this gave the Gen X kids so many nightmares.
Oh man, these cartoons were so messed up in our childhoods.
And that's why they were so sarcastic and depressed in the 90s.
Because they saw how fake the world of Shipwreck was.
That's true.
Jeremy mentioned off mic with us about how there were definitely really bad episodes of the show. Even in the Sunbow ones, they're like, this is an off one. But this shows, now this makes me think the high points of this were better than the high points of Transformers. I was more of a Transformers kid than G.I. Joe, but I think if you're comparing script to script, this was a better written show, possibly because they just hired a bunch of Marvel guys to write it.
Yeah, I've seen just as little of Thundercats and He-Man and Transformers as I've seen of this, but I was immediately repelled by those shows from the first minute. This at least had more hooks to get me into it, and it was genuinely smarter. And I feel like you're right. They got people genuinely interested in the subject matter to write the show, which matters a lot. And us knowing a lot about the history of old cartoons and bad cartoons, a lot of the writers didn't care, or they were put in a room and made to write an entire season, and they were just either failed sitcom writers or people just coasting. I mean, I'm not saying everyone was untalented, but they were not given very much of an incentive to care. But these people were talented and they did care.
Yeah, by comparison, on He-Man, we heard stories from people who did write on it that would go on to be great writers, like Paul Dini or J. Michael Straczynski, and they were very much we didn't have time to write shit. We had to do it as fast as we could and get the garbage out, because this is just garbage you're selling toys with. But it seemed like at the very least, compared to He-Man is bottom of the barrel, but at least in quality. Yeah. I like the toy. I love those toys. But meanwhile, G.I. Joe, I wonder if they were telling themselves hey, we're better than He-Man. We can do better than that.
We're not He-Man.
We're not He-Man.
Thanks for listening, folks. This has been What a Cartoon. I've had a lot of fun exploring G.I. Joe. Hope you did too. As for us, all of our shows, including Talking Simpsons, they're all supported by the Talking Simpsons Network. And if you go to patreon.com/Talking patreon.com/Talking Simpsons. You can find out how to help our show. At just $5 a month, you'll get this show a week ahead of time and ad-free every week, along with Talking Simpsons and so many bonus podcasts, exclusive series that will only live on the Patreon. Henry, what are two of the last big exclusives that we did for the Patreon?
Well, you can listen to our Season 7 wrap-up for Talking Simpsons, where we go through all of the cool news and events that happened in the world of The Simpsons during the 7th season. And if you like What a Cartoon and want to hear us talk more about anime, we did a whole one about One Piece with special guest Maddie Kopp, who also did the art for our Talking Futurama show.
And One Piece just celebrated its 21st anniversary as of this recording. Goodness. And if you think that is too much to jump into, we'll tell you how it's not, and how I am almost halfway caught up through the manga. So
whoa,
I'm climbing up that mountain. But yes, if you go to patreon.com/Talking Simpsons, there's dozens and dozens of podcasts you've never heard with us on them, and you can drop an RSS code right into your podcatcher or whatever you use to listen to podcasts. It makes it so easy to listen to all of our bonus content. You download it just like you download any other podcast. It's so simple, it's so easy. So check it out and please help support the show. As for me, I am Bob Mackey, and you can find me on Twitter as Bob Servo, and you already heard about Retronauts, so I will let Hank tell you where he is and who he is.
I'm at HENRYG on Twitter, and you can hear me talk about comic books and all the events that happen in the world of Talking Simpsons and What a Cartoon. I tweet out when we do new episodes and when new exclusives go live, so stay tuned there, kiddies.
Thank you so much for listening, folks. We'll see you next week with the X-Men episode, Out of the Past. We'll see you then.
Is your mom there?
No, I'm home alone.
Well, you won a prize. What's your address?
42 Oak Street. Hey, Roblox, some stranger's bringing me a prize.
A stranger, huh? All he wanted to bring you was trouble. Remember, never tell anyone you're home alone, and never give anyone your address.
I'll say Mom can't come to the phone.
Smart thinking.
Now I know.
And knowing is half the battle.
G.I. Joe! O'Reilly!
Check engine light on? Take the guesswork out of your check engine light with O'Reilly Veriscan. It's free and provides a report with solutions based on over 650 million vehicle scans verified by ASE-certified master technicians. And if you need help, we can recommend a shop for you. Ask for O'Reilly Veriscan today.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.